Welcome to the Times of Industry show. I love this upcoming guest that we have today. He's been around for a very long time, always very impactful with lots of insights. They just announced the Anarchapulco Yearly Summit. It's getting bigger and bigger each year, and they're going to have some fantastic speakers lined up. Jeff's going to talk about this. He's going to talk about many of the things. Um, you know, Mr. Berwick, what I like about him so much is that he's always talking about the need for one to govern himself through life instead of letting a government or any other institution indoctrinate you and shape your thinking. So, free thinkers, this is a great interview for you. His YouTube channel and his site, dollarvigilante.com, is a wealth of information. And it's always great to chat with you, Jeff. Thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Hey, I want to ask you about the impeachment first, or should I say the announcement that Pelosi made. I don't know if you caught that. Actually, her speech, it was like 6 minutes, and whoever wrote it was very focused about trying to hit hot buttons for Trump lovers, for Trump supporters, because she talked about like the founding fathers and when the pilgrims came to this country, all sorts of hot buttons for, for sound money people and constitutional people, and it was remarkable to see her jaw could not move. I think she has a health issue or something, but her jaw was just moving uh, irrationally through the wordings, and I think she didn't prep for the whatever was written in there. It was like a 6 minute lying marathon, and it was honestly a little desperate to see all of that. I want to ask you: do you think that this sort of a political theater is out of desperation? What is the angle? Because obviously, zero chance of impeachment. So, what is it all about?
Well, I think he nailed it by saying theater, because that's all this political system is, in my opinion. I think a lot of people don't realize it because they've grown up with it and their parents grew up with it and their grandparents grew up with it. And they assume it's kind of all real. But to me, it's all just a big scam. Governments are a totally illegitimate criminal organization. They've been around for hundreds of years, and they now indoctrinate your children from the pretty much the time they're able to start walking. Which I think it was Vladimir Lenin said, give me your child for 4 years and the seed I plant will never be uprooted. They've got him in the USSA, as I call it, for 12 years now. And people actually think this whole thing is real. It's actually all a show. Donald Trump is a reality TV star actor. You can just look him up on imdb.com. All these people are. And it's actually just wrestling. It's kind of funny that they actually trained Donald a little bit with the World Wrestling Federation, because that's what politics is. So to me, this is all just a show. This is to distract, and it's incredibly funny too that of all the things that they say they're going to impeach Trump on, it's not for selling the Saudis $100 billion worth of weapons that they're now using for a genocide in Yemen. It's not for running the world's largest extortion racket, the IRS. It's not for all the other horrible things he does, all kinds of wars and that sort of a thing. It's for I didn't watch her. I don't watch this stuff because actually the television programming is literally hypnosis. So I try to avoid it at all costs because it actually will implant things in your brains because that's how it's all set up. But I heard that they said it was something like he was talking to the Ukraine president, which is another show. It's all a show. And he said something, he asked about Joe Biden's son or something. It's like, oh, wow. Just like back when Bill Clinton, who was involved in all kinds of heinous terrorist acts. He was the biggest drug dealer in the world at that time, basically with the CIA. And what was he in trouble for getting a BJ from a assistant? So this is what they do. They just distract from what's really going on, keep everyone looking at this show and cheering for one side or the other side like it's wrestling, and that's literally what it is. They always try to keep it around 50%. You always see that in the polls. It's always 49% to 51% for the left or the right. They do that on purpose, and if one gets a little bit too high, they'll do something on the other side to bring it around 50-50. So people are just constantly fighting and just not realizing that they've been completely indoctrinated, completely brainwashed, completely enslaved by the system, and keep them worrying and fighting about basically nothing.
Jeff, what would you suggest in terms of how um, societies should organize themselves, cities, municipalities, companies, etc. What sort of a formation do you think would be preferable to what we have today?
Well, I think all people should have the choice to uh, organize themselves however they want. And that's the biggest problem with government is that you're born and they say you were born here, so now we own you. You are a citizen, and now you need your papers and you have to go apply for your birth certificate, which actually really says they own you. And for the rest of your life, you owe them money. That it's an insane system that over decades and centuries, people have just gotten so used to they don't even realize it anymore. Really, people should just organize themselves how they want and all voluntarily. And of course, if there was, say, no governments, if people, and that would only happen, by the way, if enough people woke up to the fact that government is a criminal organization, it's illegitimate and criminal, and it's just an extortion racket and that sort of a thing. If enough people woke up to that, they just start using private services. So instead of going to the government schools, which I highly suggest you get your kids out of immediately, it's absolutely heinous indoctrination system. Just look at Greta, Greta Thunberg or whatever her name is, how indoctrinated she is. She thinks the world's going to end in like 10 years and she's freaking out because of what she was told in her school. And I think she's had too much school already. She was saying that you've stolen from me. I should be in school right now. It's like, no, you shouldn't. You've got way too much school. You need to go play in the forest for a while. You've been indoctrinated way too much. But the private private things can run everything. So people are like, what about the police? It's like, I don't know about you, but I've never had the police ever help me. They pull me over a lot. They extort me. Uh, I called them once stupidly when I was about 20. Someone stole my bike and they came over and wrote down that someone stole my bike. And I'm like, are you going to look for it? They're like, probably not. And I was like, okay then. So people are like, what will we do without them? It's like that they don't do anything. They're basically, they'll write down a crime happened, or they'll actually commit the crime themselves most of the time. In fact, in the USA, the police now steal more than all criminals, like regular criminals, combined with asset forfeiture. So if they find some plants in your trunk of your car, they just take your car now, or your house. This happens all the time. So, and Donald Trump fully supports that, by the way. And so you ask how would people organize themselves? I don't know. Let's let them try. Let them do what. But there's no way. And here's one thing that's, a lot of people attack me for my views on government and anarchy and things like that. And I agree with them. If not enough people actually understand what I'm talking about, then we'll never be able to have a free world. But if enough people start to understand what I'm talking about, it can slowly start to happen. And people could start to walk away from all these governmental sort of systems and start going to private free market systems. And very quickly, the world would change. But it's all about waking people up. And that's why I pretty much do these shows and interviews every day now for about 10 years.
No, I completely agree with you. Look, everything is about evolution, and of course, if people are able and are capable to do capable of doing it, it would be a step forward. Nothing is permanent, and the world we live in today would be in in 200 300 years would be considered stupid. How can they organize themselves in that way? And um, but let me
Well,
switch
even
over.
100 years from now, I think people are
Hopefully.
going to I think 100 years from now, people are going to be shocked that we were using pieces of paper with dead criminals printed on them that were printed up by a communist central bank as money. like, like that is ludicrous. I can't believe that it still actually is used as money, but that's how brainwashed people are. And that's the systems they've had in place and the systems that people have gotten used to. But I think even in 20, 30, 40 years, but definitely in 50 or 100 years, our grandkids or great grandkids will be like, I can't believe you use that as money. That's hilarious. Like, like how brainwashed were you guys?
Let's talk about the new forms of money. Just in the recent days, we've seen Bitcoin and many of the altcoins go down about 15 to 20 to 30%. Bitcoin went down as we're doing this interview from 10,000 to about 83, 8,400. Um, and it happened just as Buck launched. I want to ask you if you think there's any correlation between the two events, and just in general, what are your thoughts future wise on crypto?
Yeah, I think Backed had a lot to do with it. We've been talking about Backed for about a year. For people who don't know what Backed is, it's a cryptocurrency exchange run by essentially the New York Stock Exchange. So very big financial people, Wall Street people started up a cryptocurrency sort of exchange where fund managers and people like that can pretty much for the first time buy Bitcoin because of all the rules and regulations and all that. They really couldn't before. So many of us in the crypto space thought, well, if these fund managers who manage trillions and trillions of dollars of funds, and I know a lot of them, and they do want to get into things like cryptocurrency, not everyone, but a lot of them do, that once this exchange opens, it might bring in a massive amount of money and spike Bitcoin and then by the other ones as well afterwards, a lot higher, like 100% higher, 300% higher, it totally could. But on the first day of BOCT, I think I think it was 70 contracts were exchanged. So that's, Bitcoin was around 10,000. So that's about $700,000 was exchanged that day. So less than $1 million. So a lot of us were kind of hoping that on the first day it might be $100 million or something like that. And there was really no way to know. And so when that happened, Bitcoin really started to weaken. And what happened actually a couple of days ago was the market was already getting weak. Bitcoin fell well below 10,000. It was around 9,500. And then a major miner of Bitcoin had a transformer problem and went offline. And the hash rate of Bitcoin went down by, I think, 40 to 60% in a second, which really threw off everything. And it caused a panic. And people didn't know what was happening. And they just saw the Bitcoin hash rate. So the computing power of Bitcoin almost fell by half in a few seconds. And along with the BOCT, everyone just started selling, is my belief. And yeah, we sold down to about $8,000. And we advise our subscribers that it could go a little lower here. We still have a little bit because we broke through a lot of support levels on that. But we're not changing our mid or long-term views on Bitcoin because of this. But in the short term, yeah, it definitely was interesting. And it's very typical of the cryptocurrency space to be this volatile. So we're quite used to it.
When you look at negative interest rates around the globe, Japan has had them for such a long time. People, don't talk about the Japanese economy that much, but it's negative interest rates are a norm over there. In Europe, it's becoming a norm. It's there for a few years now, and now we're reaching about $17 trillion, which is about a third of global debt trading at negative rates. I don't want to start reciting countries that have negative yield, and basically their governments are getting paid to borrow money. But we're talking about many countries, both big and small. And of course, Donald Trump is really looking forward to a day where Washington can borrow money and get paid to do so. He'll probably refinance the international debt at those levels. I want to ask you, do you think that this is a bond bubble, or do you think that this is the way that the world is just going to stay under this current structure? In other words, do you think that interest rates, at least for governments, are never going to get normalized under this fiat monetary system?
Yeah, I said that before. In 2008, after they went through the last financial crisis, they brought zero interest rates down to near 0%. And it was around 2009, 2010 when I started the Dollar Vigilante that I said they'll never really raise interest rates again because there's too much government debt. And to think back in 2008, the total US government debt was $8 trillion, or $9 trillion. It's now 22 or $23 trillion. It's nearly tripled in the last 10 years. And I already was saying that the government debt's so high that they can never raise interest rates again. Like not by anything more than a couple percent is what I said. And that's exactly what happened. And I was mocked and laughed at when I said that in 2010. Every major economist, every major analyst that saw what I said you have no idea what you're talking about. There's no way they're going to keep it at 0% for very long. It's just going to stay here for a little while, and then they'll raise it back up to kind of a more normal rate. And I said, no, they can't, because it'll actually bankrupt not only the US government, but pretty much every government in the world. And so governments always have their best interests in mind, their own self-interest, and they don't want to be bankrupted. So the final end game here is to continue just keeping interest rates as low as possible and printing money as long as possible until eventually all these fiat currencies are worthless. And that will happen very fast. So we're actually entering into that stage right now. So they've been keeping these interest rates very low. And I actually never thought they could go into negative interest rates. I didn't think it was even possible. So I have to say, I was pretty shocked when a couple of years ago, about a year ago, some of the European governments, German and a few others, actually had negative interest rates. And now the IMF actually put out a white paper or a research paper or whatever they call it, working paper they called it, and they said that negative interest rates is the way of the future for the world, and and this is actually all part of the plan because the people at the very top, and we're not talking about Ben Bernanke or Janet Yellen or Powell or any of these people. They're like low level sort of useful idiots. They just read off the teleprompters and they say their math equations and stuff, and it's all stupid. But the people at the very top know what's going on, and they know that this central banking system that they started really with the founding of the Federal Reserve in 1913. So it's been over 100 years. Has to reach an end conclusion of everyone being indebted and the currency actually being destroyed. And it's actually all on purpose. And we're actually at that level now. You look at the total number of debt, as you pointed out, worldwide debt. I was just looking it up. There's, it's very hard to exactly get an exact number here, but here's one number I found: 184 trillion in worldwide debt. That includes, I think, government and personal and corporate debt. That works out to $86,000 per person in the world. that's think about people in, name any sort of smaller country, a lot of African countries where they make like $1,000 a year or $2,000 a year. Even in Mexico here, where I think the average maybe 10,000 or 15,000, are they going to pay off $80,000 in debt as a whole? Even in the U.S., everyone's living paycheck to paycheck. So this is absolutely the end game, end stages of this central banking system, when you have the entire world indebted to the point that every single person, if you equate it per person, is $86,000 in debt. And you pointed out government debt now being in negative interest rates, and they have to do that. And this is all part of the very end stage of this game. So the end stage here is the people who run the central banks they're kind of like satanic. They hate people, basically, and they want to destroy everything, and they want to own and control everything. That's what they do, and they really do for the most part in this world today. And so what they want to do now is get into negative interest rates, then get rid of cash, and then everyone will have to be in a bank, and then you're going to be losing money every year for your negative interest rates. So I remember my grandparents, they'd put a lot of money in the bank, and they'd be making 5-10% a year, and they'd be quite happy with that. Now, if you put money in the bank, you could be losing, but that's why they actually have to get rid of fiat cash, the paper currency, because once people realize this, it's like, why would I put my money in the bank? I'm losing money just to put it there. Why don't I just keep it at home, put it under my mattress and things like that? So that's where this war on cash comes from. They actually have a very serious plan. They're moving forward very quickly on it. I think within a couple of years, they'll probably get rid of all cash. They'll make it all digital, force everyone into the banks, go into negative interest rates, and keep printing money, which is what they have to do in order to keep the system going. And then we'll go to hyperinflation very quickly within a couple of years. And so you'll be in a bank, let's say you have $10,000 in the bank, you'll be losing 5% per year just to the negative interest rates. And then the inflation rate will be probably 20 to 50% per year. Within 2 or 3 years, you'll basically lose everything, and you'll basically have no way to get out of it unless you've got into things like cryptocurrencies and precious metals or other hard assets.
So one thing that I think you'll like is that while you were answering this question, the United States government had lost an additional $8 million. While you were answering this question, the national debt grew by $8.5 million. I think you answered the question probably 5 minutes. And I got the USDebtClock.org open. The idea came up way before the national debt was a major problem by a New York based billionaire who said, look, this country's out of whack. And this, I'm talking like the 70s when national debt was probably in the millions or something. And he started this, and now it's very conclusive. It goes through many things. If you've never been to the website, you should definitely check it out. The national debt right now is 22,626,190,000. So it's insane, just literally insane. Let me say that again: 22,626,190,000,000, which works out per citizen to $68,000, or per taxpayer $183,000. when you think about the fact that 75,000 people, half of the workforce, make about 30K a year, and the debt per taxpayer is 183,000. That's 6 years worth of pure income. Anyways,
And that 22 trillion doesn't even include all the accounting things they do with things like socialist insecurity and Medicare and all that. When you add up all the sort of off balance sheet sort of things that have already been spent, it's actually over 100 trillion, well over 100. It's, people estimate between 100 and 200 trillion dollars in
I
debt.
have that exact number right here. It's U.S. total national debt, and I'll give it away in a couple of seconds because I want to ask you some very important questions regarding um, you know the future of the United States. Okay, so we're talking about a decline in empire, etc. We've been hearing about the rise of China and then the decline of the United States. The A quarter of the United States are the millennials. They're entering the workforce. They're becoming more important in society. What do you think about this generation overall? How do you assess them? I know that obviously the major points that everyone talks about are the fact that they have a lot of student debts, that they like to live in the metro cities, and they haven't formed families yet. They haven't, uh, started on their own yet. What do you think in general? You have a lot of contact with people that are of the millennial generation. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts.
Well, my main thought is that this generation, or even the ones being born right now, has never been more sort of born under so much debt before than anything else in history. It's unbelievable. You pointed out the total U.S. debt and the total numbers, even over 100 trillion. If you do the math on that, a baby born today is supposedly supposed to pay off like $500,000 or $1 million of U.S. government debt over its lifetime, and that's just a start. That sort of thing. And then, of course, the economy is quite ruined by all these government regulation. It's also quite ruined by the central bank. It's actually kind of surprising to me that a lot of the younger people haven't really gotten quite angry yet at how this whole system's been destroyed by the older generations who put all this debt on them. Because I don't know about you, but I have kids, and I would never, ever in a million years, when they were born, take out a loan and say my kids have to pay it back. That is about as bad or evil as it gets. It's like how much can you screw somebody and do that to them? And that's what prior generations have been doing through what's been going on in the government for decades now. So we see these minimum wage. Everyone wants higher minimum wage, and of course, these kids, they're so indoctrinated. They go to 12 years of government indoctrination camp where they learn nothing about how to live. They don't learn what money is. They don't even learn what a central bank is. They don't learn how to think. That would be something you'd think they'd learn in school. They're just indoctrinated. So after 12 years, they get out and they know nothing, and they can't get a job. They're like, I can't get a job, and you're like, why? And they're like, well, I don't know how to do anything. It's like, good thing you spent 12 years in government school. And then the media and everyone's like, well, you got to go to college now, and you got to pay $100,000 and go into more debt, and then you can get your Bachelor of Arts, which is completely useless, and will give you no skills after 4 more years. And then they get out and they try to work at McDonald's, and they're like, wow, I can't even exist at $12 an hour. The rent's like $800 a month, and that sort of a thing. And because they went to college, where they're mostly taught socialist sort of things, they think that the problem is capitalism, and the McDonald's is screwing them, when it's actually the central banks have been inflating so much and the government regulations have destroyed the economy so much that they can barely even afford to live. So a lot of the younger people are kind of getting angry, but they're getting angry at the wrong things because of what they've been told. They're angry that a lot of them, if you look at polls, especially in the US, like over 50% of young people think that a socialism, which is basically just communism light, is a really good idea. And so if they continue down that path, they'll just continue to destroy themselves even more. So yeah, for your average young person who's gone through all the education and watched their television programming every day, they have no idea what's going on. They have no idea how bad of shape they're in, and they're not going to be ready at all when things get even worse, which is going to absolutely get much worse. I think the smart kids will be getting into cryptocurrencies right now. They'll be not going to government schools. They'll be on the internet trying to learn whatever skills they can there, trying to start businesses, preferably outside of the US, where it's a lot freer and a lot better economy in general in a lot of places than the US, and that sort of a thing. But your average kid, it just has been almost completely destroyed already. And you look at, again, this Greta Thunberg, which is a total actor for it's actually George Soros. She works for George Soros. They're trying to bring in more government and a one world government and a carbon tax and tax people even more because the world's going to end in 12 years, according to what she was told in school. And you look at her, and a lot of people are like, yeah, look, she's all angry at the system. This is good. And I'm like, yeah, but what's she talking about? She's saying bring in more government taxes and more government control over things, which is what they want. Whereas if she really knew what was going on, she'd say we need to shut down all governments and all central banks right now, and get into a free market system.
You know, I want to ask you about uh, President Trump, and I want to ask you about the trade deal. Um, how important is this trade deal to the future of the global economy? Do you think this is the most important deal of the 21st century as you see it? Do you think that there will be a partial deal before the elections to help uh, Trump get his approval ratings higher? Do you think he'll hold back? What do you think in general about the next 12 months and how the trade deal will happen or not happen? Um, I really want to get your thoughts on that, and I really want to understand if you think that what you've talked about. So Sanders and Warren, that are very socialistic in view, do you think that they have a chance of getting a large portion of the population to vote for them?
Well, when it comes to trade deals, I believe in total free trade. That's the best case scenario. That there's no government involvement whatsoever. There's no tariffs. There's no regulations. There's no customs. There's nothing like that. That would be, if we had that, the world would be so much better and everyone would be so much richer. Uh, Really, when government's been talking about free trade deals now for decades, and the free trade deal comes out and it's like a phone book of regulations and tariffs and all this sort of stuff, and they do that on purpose because they're basically controlled by corporate interests and things like that. So the aluminum lobby will go and give like $1 million to somebody in government to pass a tariff against a Chinese aluminum company so that it can make more money and stuff like that. The best case scenario is total free trade. So Trump and the U.S. government should stay out of trade whatsoever, and that would actually be the best case scenario. But that's not the situation because everyone's so indoctrinated. They actually think that this is good, that he's doing deals for the country, which the country doesn't even really exist. There's just 350 million individuals there trying to trade with about 1 billion individuals in China, and the government's just stealing most of it and causing so many problems. And of course, even when he puts tariffs on things, that's the funny part is a lot of the people who wear red MAGA hats and all that, they're like, yeah, good, Trump's really screwing the Chinese. It's like, no, he's not. He's actually screwing you because he's not charging the Chinese anything. And he's not charging any Chinese people $1. He's actually just making it more expensive for Americans to buy. So he's actually just increasing the cost of things for Americans, essentially another tax on Americans. And so I don't actually pay attention to what they do because it's all just criminal. It's all a criminal and a show. Even this Chinese thing is just a show. It's just to make people go, oh, good thing we've got Trump fighting for us, or the Chinese would really screw us by selling us really cheap televisions. It's like, I don't mind getting a cheap television. Why does Trump have to make it more expensive? So I don't even pay attention to it. And as far as will all of this and what's going on bring in Bernie Sanders and all this as president, it doesn't matter. It's the same agenda. Even Trump hasn't changed anything that Barack Obama was doing. The wars continue. The IRS keeps taxing. The Federal Reserve keeps printing money. All that changes is the rhetoric and the show. The agenda does not change. It does not matter who the president is. The president actually, it's funny too, because a lot of people say when Barack Drone Bomber, the Nobel Peace Prize winning president who dropped hundreds of thousands of bombs on little kids, that no one seemed to notice. When he was president, a lot of the Obama people said, oh, he can't really do anything. The president doesn't really have any power. That's why he hasn't really been able to change anything. That's why he basically just looks like George Bush, but he's a different color. And then a lot of the Trump people were like, well, Trump's in, but not really anything's changed. And it's because the president doesn't really have any power to change anything. It's like, yeah, they really don't. They're teleprompter readers. They're actors. Barack Obama is as well. They work for the what you call the deep state, and Trump does as well. Even if he doesn't even know in some ways how he's working for them, he does. He takes his orders from them, and and that's what he does. So I don't pay attention. I don't care. Whatever they do, I don't care. I just go around whatever regulations or laws they make, and I just mostly work in the black market, which is the free market, and just try to avoid them, and then also take advantage of all the craziness that they cause. So, if they're going to print up tons more money, the central bank, then I'm going to buy more precious metals and cryptocurrencies and things like that. So I pay attention to see how much of what they're doing, but I couldn't care less what they do. These guys are criminals and a joke. And the sooner that people wake up to that, the sooner we'll have a better world.
So, in light of this, I want to ask you about the fact that the U.S. government is going after some of the social media giants. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, these these social media giants like Google and Facebook, they're basically part of the CIA. They have been all along. Look at Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google. As soon as he stopped being the CEO of Google, he now works at the Pentagram, at the Pentagon for the U.S. Department of Defense. He's his CIA guy from the start. Google and Facebook were CIA operations. They still are. So what they do is, a lot of people are going. Here's the thing that a lot of people always do. They realize there's a problem. They realize Google's like pretty much spying on them and selling their data and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of people are like, well, we need the government to do something. Google is the government. And so they just put on this show. They're like, oh, sure, we'll make sure that we take care of this. and like people just need to get off those platforms. Just go to better platforms that aren't CIA operations, like any sort of blockchain-based social media site. Steemit.com. There's float.app, FLOTE.app for YouTube type stuff. There's BitChute, there's DTube, there's all kinds of ones. Some of them aren't quite as good because they don't have a multi-$100 billion budget like the FBI book and Google. But the more that we have the option to move away from those things, and the fact that people are asking the government to take care of it, just shows they don't realize what's going on. See, the FBI, sorry, I keep confusing them because they're the same thing. Facebook, Google, and the CIA are the same thing, and the CIA basically is the government. And to go to the government asking for them to fix a problem with Facebook or Google is completely moronic when you understand what's going on.
Okay, let's talk about precious metals for 1 minute. Are we in a bull market, Jeff, in your opinion, or do we need to see an all-time high nominal for gold for this to be an official bull market? What do you think?
Well, there's many different definitions of bull markets. For me, it's definitely a bull market now. And the reason is that we've seen gold hit all-time highs in most currencies except for the US dollar, and I think the euro, but it's very close on the euro. And silver has been moving up a lot. It was $14 about a year ago. It hit $20 or close to $20 just a couple weeks ago. So that is enough for me to say that's definitely a bull market. And the reason it's a bull market is because of what's going on. We look at this repo market where the last time the Federal Reserve got involved in the repo market was 2008. I don't know if anyone remembers what happened in 2008. A lot of people drink a lot of fluoride and get vaccinated and they can't really think much anymore. But back in 2008, there was a pretty big crisis. And so the Federal Reserve actually had to go into the repo market and start buying up bonds. And they just started doing that in the last couple of weeks for hundreds of billions, I believe, or it was a very large amount. Yeah, it was hundreds of billions. I think that's going to increase massively. And I think we're very close now. We're talking days, weeks, months. I don't think more than a year or two max, and I can't even imagine 2 years. I think we're going to be in crisis mode any second now, and we're starting to see that with the precious metals. So whether you call it a bull market, whether it meets the definition of a bull market for gold, because gold hasn't yet topped its 2011 high near 2000, I don't care. Gold's going higher, and people better get it before it's too late.
Jeff, two things. One thing I promised you is the U.S. total debt, and that is 73 trillion 893 billion 454 million and counting. And lastly, I want you to give out to people a little bit about Dollar Vigilante, exactly what you guys do over there. I know you have paid services. I know you have free stuff. So plug us in if you don't mind, and then why don't you talk about Acapulco, and we can see the Bay of Acapulco in the background. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. The Dollar Vigilante started in 2010, and the tagline is surviving and prospering during and after the dollar collapse. And I actually said back then that I expected by the end of this decade, which we're only a few months away from now, and I think it started, that we'd be in a crisis, and these currencies would all start to collapse, banks would close, things like that. We're very close to it. It could happen by the end of this year. So I almost have nailed it, I think, but we'll find out. And maybe I might be a year off. It could be next year. I can't see it this going 2 more years. So we've been doing that and telling people how to protect themselves and profit from it. And because we're essentially anarcho-capitalists, we don't believe in government, but we believe in the markets. And so we're trying to profit from everything, all this craziness that's going on that's actually going to destroy so many people when the banks close, when the currencies collapse, when all kinds of, when the bond market collapses. Most people are going to lose everything in this crisis, but we've actually been doing incredibly well. We've been in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin since $3 in 2011. It's now $8,000, and also been in gold and silver the entire time. I forget where it was at around 2010, but I think it's up from there, and we think it's going way higher. And so we've been recommending that. We still recommend things like that. So if you're interested in that, before it's too late, and I would really say to rush, is go to dollarvigilante.com/subscribe and check it out. And then you mentioned Anarchapulco. That's our sort of free market, voluntarist, anarcho-capitalist conference, which we're expecting 3,000 people on the beach in Acapulco, Mexico in February. We just announced speakers for it. There's speakers like Ron Paul, John McAfee. Let me just pull it up because there's so many of them. Actually, I don't have it quite just handy right here at the moment, but we just announced it. Doug Casey. There's a just go to narcopolco.com and check it out. We're just announcing the speakers there, and it's really an event for anyone who wants to learn how to free themselves, not just from the government system and not just from like the financial and monetary system, but even their health and things like that. And so we have an entire health and wellness portion of the event, because most things, just like everything I've just been talking about, the politics thing is all a show and a scam. The monetary system, the central banks are a scam and a big show for the most part. And so is the medical system. And a lot of people don't fully realize that yet, that for the most part, this medical system and a lot of doctors and what they're giving you isn't to make you well. It's actually to keep you sick. And so we have dozens and dozens of the top health and wellness type people from across the world come every year, and just amazing results for so many people, and just finding out about just different ways that you can heal yourself, because actually our bodies heal themselves. This is one of the things they don't want us to know. And all we need to do is take care of our bodies, and we can actually heal ourselves for pretty much everything. And there's different ways to take care of yourself and things like that. So it's really just a way, and also get away from the education systems. We talk about unschooling. So we have a free your family camp at Anarchapulco. You can bring your kids down, learn how to unschool, learn how what it's like to have kids that aren't in school, and they're actually kids, and they're allowed to run around and do what kids are supposed to do. It turns out that you end up with kids who are pretty amazing as compared to a lot of kids coming out of the government schools, which are dumbed down and angry and on drugs, drinking, because they just went through 12 years of being in prison. So check it out at narcopolco.com. It's a lot of things. If you're interested at all in freeing yourself in any way, that would be the place to go.
Jeff, thank you very much. Narcopolco.com, dollarvigilante.com, and definitely we'll touch base in a couple of months and do this again.
Thank you, Lior.